Hello, everyone on Patreon. Thank you so much for voting this month on a bonus movie review. The winner this month is Hotel du Nord. This is from 1938. It was directed by Marcel Carne, and it starred Annabella, Jean-Pierre Aumont, Louis Jouvet, and Arletty. I hope I've got the pronunciation somewhat right of these fantastic French names. The plot, according to IMDb, is on the meandering Canal Saint Martin at the Parisian Hotel du Nord. A nearly fatal gunshot separates a dejected young couple, but amid a sad but beautiful panorama of lively characters, love has the final say. Can life be a fairy tale? This is a really interesting film, which I hadn't heard of until maybe in just the last few months because the Criterion Collection put it on in their catalog on Blu-ray. It's also on DVD. It's also on the Criterion channel. And I'm not too familiar with Marcel Carne, but this is from the style that was really blooming in the 30s of poetic realism. And so, what is poetic realism? I had to really actually look it up and explore it. But basically having this a realistic story, but having a strong aesthetic, which where the aesthetic is really pops or it's really beautiful, and where it's clearly designed and even artificial in a good sense. Because here, it's all done on sets. The hotel's on a set. Everything's on a set, and it's obvious that it's a set, but it looks so good. I mean, it looks absolutely incredible. So it has this poetic feel to it while being really realistic, and it's a pretty good film. I wouldn't say I loved it or I thought it was a masterpiece or anything, but it's pretty good, and it explores a number of themes like cowardice, love, being able to start again, hope. It's pretty interesting. I mean, for my taste, everyone was a little too articulate. Everyone was a little too smart and a little too understanding of their emotions. And where I'm not saying I have a problem with that. I mean, that can work beautifully. But in this case, because these were people who were who were from the streets, who were marginalized. For the woman Annabella plays was an orphan. The other character Edmund was a criminal, and so everyone just seemed to me to be a little too sophisticated for what I think these kind of people may have been more realistic to be like, as would have been like. But that, with that being said, it's still really emotionally gripping, and like I said, very stylized. It has a real stylistic, expressionistic, almost film noir like feel, and some real stylized shots. Like, for example, Pierre. I mean, it starts with this suicide pact between this couple. They go into this hotel because they feel that they really can't afford to live, and they don't have much money. And so he feels as though he can't take care of her, and all they have is their love, but their love is not going to be enough. It has a Romeo and Juliet kind of feel to it. So they have this pact to kill themselves, and he shoots her, but then after he shoots her, he didn't have the heart to then shoot himself, so he runs off. And there's a scene outside where he is about to jump over off a bridge, and as the train is approaching, the streetcar passes behind him. So we hear the train, but now the streetcar has blocked our view of him. So we're thinking, did he jump or not? And then once the streetcar passes, we just see all this fog. And then as the fog disappears, he's still there. So he didn't jump. So it's a real stylized, intentional shot of what they were doing, but it's breathtaking and emotional and really suspenseful and thrilling. So again, it has a number of things like that. I I was watching an interview with the director of Amélie, and he said everything he does, or most of what, I don't know his work too well either, but has been inspired by poetic realism and Marcel Carne. And so, yeah, if you watch Amélie, you can certainly see that. I mean, it is a really realistic film, but the aesthetic is very, very stylized and really beautiful and really, really pops. Um, but it's really a simple story at its core. And one thing I certainly felt was that what I liked was that in this hotel we have all these different kinds of characters, and everybody's so distinctive, and everybody is brings a lot of humor to it as well, because we have this really serious drama with this suicide pact. And then the other characters, which are the focus, who are Monsieur Edmond and Raymond, which I'll get to. But everybody else is I love when directors and writers are they just love people, and they're not just interested in supporting characters pushing a narrative forward like in a conventional sense. They're interested in just filling the palette of what something like this may be. And so after the suicide pact, Pierre turns himself in, and Renee says, "Oh, she tries to say that she did it because she didn't want him to go to jail." And so he goes to jail. And what's interesting is that when she visits him in jail, is that she wants him to hold on, and he wants her to just leave him because he is so ashamed of himself and feels like such a coward that he didn't kill himself after he shot her, that he was a cowardice enough to then run, and so he can't even face her. And so there's this existential crisis where she doesn't know what to do. She goes back to the hotel, and they're kind enough to help her and give her a job there. So she starts working there, and she meets Edmund, who is this pimp, a brutal, rough character. And his girlfriend, Raymond, is also a prostitute who works for him. And so they have this complicated relationship. And he even hits her at a certain point because he begins to fall in love with Annabella, and she gets jealous. And it was interesting how they shot it, because you see when her jealousy is increasing, and it's a close up of her face, and then the next shot is just a bruise on her eye. So we know, right, that she confronted him about it and that he hit her. So again, just from a visual standpoint, I like how they communicated that without actually showing a confrontation or a violent scene or him hitting her. We know what happened, based going from a close up of her face to a bruise. So I like that. It was interesting. That's not always my taste, because I feel like it was a shortcut to just get the point across. But in this case, it worked for me. I thought that was, just from a stylistic point of view, really interesting. But Edmund, it's clear that he's falling for Annabella. He was meant to take Raymond away on a long trip, and then once she begins to work there, Renee, he cancels the trip. People are picking on her, undoing her apron. She works as a waitress there. Everyone, she's really pretty, so some of the men are after her. And Edmond defends her. He steps in and gets very confrontational with someone who's bugging her. So it's becoming quite apparent how he feels. But what's interesting is that this man hardly speaks. He's just quiet and sinister. And then outside, there's this wonderful scene between them where he talks about who he really is, that his name is actually Robert. And what we saw earlier was that these men come in looking for someone. And Raymond says, "Oh, Paolo is the name. She doesn't know where he is." And what you find out is that Edmund was Paolo. And so he, again, this theme of cowardice comes in, because he had actually turned in some people who he was working with. They did something that was criminal, and he ratted them out, and they went to jail, and he didn't. And so now they're after him, and so he changed everything about himself. So people are coming around, "Hey, do you see someone who's always singing, always who will always is playing a guitar and everything?" And they're like, no one's like that, because this guy is a complete opposite, which he did intentionally, which was, the guitar was gone. He dressed differently. He changed his name. He would fight, and whereas Paolo refused to fight, and things like that. So that was interesting how he changed his whole persona. And again, this theme of cowardice, very much like with Pierre, who she's in love with. He couldn't kill himself, and now Edmund has done something where he can't face what he did to these people he worked with, and so he's hiding, and he is trying to deal with his cowardice, and he can't deal with it, and it's turned him into Edmund, who's this cruel character. And so they have this connection between one another. They feel as though they understand that they both wanted the same thing because of this troubled past. You know, she was an orphan. She was in an orphanage until she was 21. So she's had a rough life, and Edmund could relate. So they could relate to one another. They connected, and they both really wanted to start fresh. And so she thinks it's over with Pierre. You know, he can't face what he did. And so Edmund wants what I want. Let's run off together. So they make this pact to run off together. And of course, she leaves him on the boat, you know, because she's in love with Pierre. She runs off the boat. She leaves him there, and now the hope that she was trying to instill in Pierre, he's starting to come around. He feels as though they can start again. They can forgive one another. And what's quite interesting is that she forgives him immediately. Like, she truly loves Pierre, even though he shot her and then didn't shoot himself. She forgives him. She understood that it was that he just couldn't do it, and so she loved him enough to start again. But I find this element of hope and forgiveness mixed in with cowardice to be quite interesting. And so what we see is, again, when Edmund comes back, and you know, he pulls Annabella over, and she knew he was going to eventually come back, and she goes back to the hotel where she was working, and he's totally understanding. He doesn't blame her. He understands that she is totally in love with Pierre, and he thanked her just for that little time that they had together. And so now these other criminals looking for him, have come back, and because Raymond feels betrayed by Edmund, you know, now he left Raymond for Renee. She tells the criminals that he's actually this guy Edmund, and she wants him to be killed. And what's interesting is that the gun that Pierre uses to shoot himself, he threw away outside, and Edmund found it in the beginning of the film. This kid is playing with a gun, so he has the gun, and so he goes in. And I had a feeling this was going to happen. He goes into his room. You know, he knows these criminals are there. He goes up to it. Why would he go up to the room? Clearly, he's ready to die. He feels as though he's sick of hiding. He's sick of not being who he is. He's sick of running. He doesn't believe now that he can have anything new and a new life and any kind of love. And so the self-hatred he just gives because of his self-hatred, his self-loathing, he gives the gun to the criminal, and the criminal shoots him. And so it ends tragically for him, and it ends hopeful and optimistic for Renee and Pierre. So it's this interesting contrast between beauty for two people and death for another. So again, it's good. It's powerful. It's quite strong. And I did enjoy it. I did. What I felt was also really good was just the acting in general. I mean, in this film anyways, not that I've seen every French film from the 30s, but they were clearly ahead of Americans at that time, because not many actors in the 30s, with the exception of some, were that realistic on film. It really didn't come until a decade or so later, but the French in this film anyways, they were all really, really good, really truthful and powerful, particularly Arletty, who played Raymond. There's a great scene which was both funny and dramatic, where she really tells off Monsieur Edmund outside, and you know, she says that he's, you know, he's like he says something along the lines of he needs new atmosphere, and just the way she mocked him, atmosphere, you want atmosphere. And apparently that was a line people said all the time in France, and fans of the film to this day will quote that line. It's sort of like in Hollywood films how people will take lines like, you know, like out of A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth, or The Godfather, I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. In France, it's atmosphere. that's their great line, and she's so good. She just had this energy and conviction and anger and sorrow, and just all this was so committed that there's something funny about it at the same time. But I thought she was a wonderful actor. I'd love to see more films with her, and everybody, Annabella, Jean-Pierre Aumont, Louis Jouvet, they were all, like I said, really, really good. So it's certainly worth seeing. I did quite enjoy it. So I'm glad I discovered it, found it, put it on the poll. And for those of you who voted, thank you for voting, because I'm glad I saw it. And I hope that if you've seen it, you liked it as well. But please comment below. Let me know what you think of this film. I hope that you've enjoyed the review. And if you haven't seen this film, it is on the Criterion channel again. Thank you so much for voting, and I will see you in the next video.